Back in December, I ended up posting a Fire Emblem Fates Revelation draft on my Discord, and it was a pretty interesting experience. Partially because we had a decent chunk of people who wanted to partake in it, and also because there were plenty who never played Rev that joined in. So, how did that end up working out? Well, I'll start out by sharing what the final picks ended up being. If you look off to the left, you'll notice that the picks were actually made by teams. Because 10 people were participating, I randomized everyone into teams of 2, making certain everyone who had little to no experience with Rev was paired with someone who felt fairly confident with the game. And honestly, this choice alone made some of the draft picks very interesting. I do want to talk about what I knew of each team's strategy at different points throughout the video, but all that matters for now are my choices. I'm Team 1, if you couldn't tell from the fact that I'm obviously the only person who would ever pick up Setsuna. You might also notice that I don't get anyone until after Chapter 10. I plan on explaining each of my units as I get them, but the overall idea was that I wanted to provide my partner with a pretty well-balanced team, one that I'm comfortable with and containing units I like, but still well-balanced. Of course, as I play through the first few maps of the game, you may notice an odd choice of mine. See, I'm playing with a Maelcorn whose secondary class is Cavalier, and if you paid attention to the picks earlier, you may have noticed that Dwyer wasn't a free unit. In fact, he was a unit my team chose to pick up. It was a choice on my end to provide an extra potential early unit to my partner. This was the funniest part of the entire draft to me, because we both ended up playing as Maelcorn. I made that choice for nothing. I guess we denied people Dwyer for the fun of it? I don't know if anyone would have used him though. Whatever the case was, I began my journey as the illustrious Don Quixote. Thankfully, despite not getting any of the early recruits, the first few chapters played out like normal. Felicia spent Chapter 7 grinding experience on the boss, while Don Quixote was off in search of dragons to fight, though he mostly found chests to open and a few enemies to kill. As we moved on to Chapter 8, Felicia was reclassed into a strategist. This was mostly so she could learn Inspiration early, as she'd already reached level 15 from her grinding on the previous map. For once in my life, I'm actually using Inspiration to make the start of Revelation a bit easier. Otherwise, Chapter 8 was hardly noteworthy as it plays out normally. However, as we enter Chapter 9, you might notice I'm deploying units I didn't draft. This is due to the rules I put in place to be kind to everyone. For Chapter 9 specifically, I allowed free deployment to make the map go by more easily for others. I also made it a rule that any force deploys on a map are free to use for that map, such as Rinka in this situation. I personally chose to kill off everyone to focus experience into my free units, which meant I could get a few levels on Gunter for him to learn rally defense. This would be his only real use for the rest of the run. Of course, there were 2 excess units who I held off on killing for a bit, those being Kaze and Tsubaki, as I wanted a lock touch user to open all the chests on this map. They were killed as soon as they fulfilled their duty, though. Actually, speaking of lock touch users, I don't really get one on my team, and that's thanks in large part to the beauty of Team 3. This is the only team whose plan I fully knew ahead of time, and that's because they said something so stupid in their planning thread on the Discord that I had to come in and comment on it. What they said was, and I quote, "What if we tried to take all the ninjas?" I promptly went through all 5 stages of grief in their thread before deciding it would actually be hilarious if they did Ninja Emblem. Of course, this meant I didn't end up getting any ninja of my own, though Team 3 sadly didn't get Kaze, which was a favorite character of one of them. I continue to weep for them to this day. As of writing this script, I believe the one who suggested all ninja has ended up suffering so greatly that they chose to start the game back from the beginning, now with a ban on the ninja class. The Kaze lover has beaten the game, no longer held back from their beautiful ninja husband. Back to my game, with Chapter 9 now out of the way, I slowly cleared out Chapter 10. And for completing this chapter, I finally get my first unit. Oboro was my team's second pick and one of our 4 planned units. She was one of my 2 major demands, taking the top spot of the 2 due to her being one of my favorite characters. She also benefits from being an extremely good unit in this game. Due to all of my time modding Fates for fun, along with a funny mod I hope to do a run with someday, I've learned that Oboro has the most average growths among all the first generation units in Fates. This puts her growths in a place where she can act as a jack of all trades, making her pretty versatile in what she can do. And the Spear Fighter class she starts in works perfectly for her growths, as she can fill the niche of a debuffer, tank, physical fighter, or magic user down the line, if absolutely necessary. Speaking of magic, I get my second unit in Ninja Hell, having picked up Orochi. Those who know me realize I'm not a big fan of magic and Fates, so it's a bit weird that I would actively choose her. Orochi was my 5th pick, and wasn't one we really planned in advance. I only really picked her up because my teammate wanted at least one magic user. We were gunning for Leo, but Team 5 picked him up right before we got our 5th pick. So we picked up Orochi, who we knew they wanted. And you know what? While we go through Chapter 11, I may as well talk about Team 5. Team 5 made it pretty apparent what they were planning from the start. Both team members were pretty vocal about what they wanted to do before teams were assigned, and both of them wanted to go for some magic gaming. I will also note that this was the only team that had no one who claimed to be unfamiliar with Fates. Anyways, what they mentioned in front of everyone was wanting different magic users and essentially making their own magical armies. One of the people on this team really wanted Orochi as one of their big picks so that they could capture enemies. However, they took Leo before we could, making our only magical options Odin, Orochi, and Nyx. Orochi was my team's best bet. Luckily, Team 5 got Niles, so they could still capture units from some of the child paralogs. However, I'd be the one who gets to enjoy capturing random units from story maps. And you know what? That decision is gonna make me say a few weird things. All of it starts with me feeding Orochi 1 spirit dust so she has a better chance to capture a master ninja on this map. However, she was having difficulties with doing so, but she was getting decent levels throughout the map, which then culminated in the ultimate gamble. Unbeknownst to me, this would decide the trajectory of the entire run. I made a gamble with Orochi on trying to capture the last possible Master Ninja on this map. If she failed, I would let her stay dead. But if she succeeded, I'd give her a chance. It came close, but against all odds, she pulled through. So I'd like to welcome you all to Orochi Gaming and the beginning of my capture addiction. Having dedicated myself to the way of Orochi, I spent Chapter 12 feeding experience to her. Thanks to my units currently being drip-fed to me, I'm able to focus on feeding them experience on their join maps or the map directly afterwards. Oboro got her training last map, while Orochi got hers here. For deciding to put my faith in Orochi, she chose to reward me with a near-perfect level up. I didn't know she was capable of doing this. But clearly, my teammate and I chose the correct magic user to steal. To provide Orochi with enrichment after such a success, I let her capture a random sorcerer. I'm starting to understand people who enjoy using the capture skill, and I'm not even getting the full benefits from playing on Lunatic. This is just hard mode rev. With everyone well trained off of Flora's army, we enter Chapter 13. It's here I get Keaton. He was the 3rd planned pick for my team and the 2nd of my 2 demands. I wanted him around as my major attacker, thanks to him essentially being a furry berserker. He's a bit better than a berserker though, thanks to his class skills giving him healing and making him more effective against cavalry. His daughter is also a pretty good unit, meaning I get 2 good units for the price of 1. Thankfully, since Keaton joins at level 15 with good stats, all my units are pretty equal at this point. So I don't need to focus on leveling any one character. Instead, I could focus on grinding supports. At this point, I had 3 different supports I was working towards. One was a friendship between Oboro and Orochi, another was a friendship between Don Quixote and Keaton, and the 3rd was a marriage between Keaton and Azura. As Oboro works on destroying Xander, I may as well take a moment to talk about Team 2. Why? I don't know. They picked up the other furry in Ryoma, who will fight in a second. Team 2 was one of the 2 teams that didn't really give off much of an idea of what they were planning. But among all of the teams, they were pretty normal, right alongside my team, weirdly enough. By which I mean, just like with my team, they seem to gravitate towards picking up units they personally like alongside other units that really rounded out their team. Though they got bigger names than my team. I mean, getting both Sakura and Ryoma in a draft is no small feat. Overall, I think their lineup is pretty respectable. Also, the Fates veteran for that team did a better job of being considerate about early game for their partner than I did, so kudos to them for that. I am still kind of sorry to my teammate. Back to my chapter 13 though, Oboro easily killed Xander. Since that got her to level 19, I fed her some more experience to reach level 20 and promote before fighting Ryoma. It ended up working out perfectly, as Ryoma was unable to crit or double Oboro. Of course, there was still the issue of his high avoidance, but Oboro didn't seem to care. The Ryoma fight went so easily that I was genuinely speechless in the moment. But it didn't matter, as my army would continue to surprise me in the coming chapter. See, towards the start of chapter 14, I ended up promoting Orochi to the Basara class, and her stats were surprisingly good. Like, she had the ability to tank some of the paladins here if she needed to. All I ever did was feed her a spirit dust. And she'll only become better in the future thanks to the benefits of the Basara class. Once she's friends with Oboro, this will include learning Seal Defense and Swap, which will provide Orochi with some extra usage in case her magic isn't helpful at the moment. I was so caught up in Orochi's success though, that I forgot to pick up the Levin sword from one of the houses on the map. Ignoring how upset that made me in the moment, I'll talk about the unit I get here. Benny tends to get ignored in Rev, which makes it really funny that he was my team's 4th planned pick in the draft. However, I think he's a real sleeper hit for this route. Ignoring the fact that we chose him because it was funny, he is here to be a really good defensive wall. Nobody can do it quite like Benny, and because he's recruited using Elise, I may as well talk about the final team. Team 4 was the wild card of the teams. Nobody really knew any part of what they were planning, so they were the most likely to mess with people's picks. Especially when you consider the fact that this was the team that chose to play the draft on Lunatic. The only thing anyone knew about that team going into the draft was one of them wanted to make Wyvern Elise happen. That knowledge was enough to strike fear in me. I genuinely don't know what to expect from someone who wants to make Wyvern Elise in Lunatic Rev. They could be capable of anything. At least with Team 2, I could expect a normal, balanced army. Still, I've gotta respect them for the commitment. Anyways, with chapter 14 finished, I spent some time grinding supports between Oboro and Benny. Doing so would allow me to pick up Ignatius immediately. I do so now, as the longer I hold off his paralog, the more difficult it becomes to complete, and I'd like to obtain every unit available to me if I can. Thankfully, I was able to fill out my ranks with captures to make this map a bit easier. Not to mention that all of my units are promoted and decently far ahead on levels. And with Gunter in the Wyvern Lord class, I could ferry over Don Quixote to protect Ignatius. With another unit in my pocket, I fought my way through Sevenfold Sanctuary. With how powerful my units were, the map wasn't all too interesting. Don Quixote and Orochi rolled through the right side of the map. Meanwhile, the left side was used for training Ignatius so he could catch up to everyone else. The next map is more interesting, as this is where I get my final first generation units. Those units being Hinoka, her retainers, and Scarlet. Of these units, Hinoka was my team's only planned pick. In fact, she was our very first pick, as she was the character my teammate demanded. Which was fine by me, as she's a good unit and shows up in a flying class, making her invaluable in Rev. Setsuna and Azama, on the other hand, were our 6th and 8th picks respectively. They were completely unplanned, but they were chosen to help balance out our roster. Setsuna not being a planned pick from me might be a surprise, but I did so to try and psych out others. I still ended up picking her, as having an archer is really nice in Vala. She was a pretty easy choice when both Takumi and Mozu had already been picked by other teams. As for Azama, it was kind of a surprise he managed to last until the final round of picks. He has some of the best stats in the game, and his daughter is also a pretty good unit. The only explanation I can give is maybe people had better plans in mind that didn't need him, or they didn't want to put in the effort for him when he's such a late unit in Rev. I'm still glad we managed to get him for our final pick. If anything, it was nice for the joke of obtaining a full trio of a lord and their retainers. As for the actual map, it's nothing too difficult. It's the perfect moment to start grinding experience on Setsuna, while also working on getting support points. However, the next map is much more difficult with my limited deployment. It was a question of balancing units I want to level up with units who I know can easily handle the map. I did mess up the map once from overreaching at the start, but by carefully using Orochi as my main tank, I was able to eventually get the map rolling, which made it pretty safe to get levels on Setsuna before promoting her to the sniper class. Iago was thankfully good enough to kill Xander and Leo, but weak enough to die to Setsuna. Before making my way into Vala though, I reclassed Scarlet into a Bow Knight. This is due to Outlaw being part of her class set and my need for a Lock Touch unit. While I can use my captured Master Ninja, it was always my plan to pass Lock Touch down to my daughter. So, before I could start Chapter 18, I had to spend some time grinding supports with Scarlet while making sure she leveled up as a Bow Knight. Not wanting to subject my livestream watchers to hours of grinding, I did most of it offline. During that time, I managed to complete other S supports and give Don Quixote the hero class through Keaton Friendship. With all my plans falling into place, I then picked up my daughter Sancho. She sadly shows up at level 20 without an offspring seal due to when I'm recruiting her, but now is really the only time to do so if I want full control over Sancho's inherited skills. I also made sure to capture Lloyd and Llewellyn while I'm here since I have Orochi. Back to Sancho though, I can immediately change her out of the Nor Princess class line as she's already inherited Draconic Hex from Don Quixote. As such, I immediately promote and reclass her to a Wyvern Lord. This allows me to have a second usable flyer for the start of Vala. I know that there are others I can technically reclass to flyers, but I very specifically chose everyone's classes so my team can be balanced out, and having more than 2 or 3 flyers can be a bit overkill. Just ignore the fact that over half of my army consists of lance users right now. Anyways, I end up killing my wife to continue the story and finally begin the Vala maps. Chapter 18 isn't all too difficult as Orochi and Benny both carry their weight. And Oboro, of course, is quite capable of handling most of the right side of the map with some assistance from my flyers. Chapter 19 was also pretty easy, as Sancho now had Rally Defense to buff all my units, and Orochi is still weirdly tanky. I hadn't really considered it when picking Orochi, but combining her as a Basara with Oboro Friendship can make her an extremely powerful unit. She's not perfect by any means, but she's surprisingly competent once she gets going. I then put off the bridge map to do Dwyer's Paralog. While Dwyer was one of my team's picks, I had no actual plans to use him. I was only using his map to better balance my unit experience, otherwise known as letting everyone catch up to Oboro and Orochi. When I finally moved on to handling Chapter 20 afterwards, I found it wasn't all that hard. I think it's a pretty easy map. It can just feel like a slog to get through due to the gimmick. Though I did have a moment where it was nice to see that I continued to learn and improve at playing this game even after a decade. I've teleported units around before using the Dragon Veins here, but it felt nice realizing I could use the map gimmick to greater effect. More importantly, upon completing Chapter 20, child units will now start at promoted level 6. I didn't really take advantage of the fact this gets them a free level 5 promoted skill, but it felt like the right time to pick up my last 2 units. I chose to pick up Valoria first, since it can be rather difficult as a conquest map. Thankfully, I had a plan in mind to handle the map with little issue. I made sure to start by using a Dragon Vein in order to silence everyone, before sending in Benny, Oboro, and Ignatius to act as a shield. My other units would be huddled behind them for safety, with Felicia providing an inspiration buff. After surviving enemy phase, I immediately pushed forward and killed the entrapped strategist from 2 tiles away. I did so as entering the column to the right of the strategist will summon enemy reinforcements behind me. Afterwards, I used another Dragon Vein to make sure the mages wouldn't kill me during the next enemy phase. On my next turn, I used the final Dragon Vein before pushing past the trigger to summon enemy reinforcements. However, the reinforcements never showed, as I had Orochi and Azama standing on the forts they would appear from. This allowed me to focus on pushing through the remainder of the enemy blockade without having to worry about my rear guard. Once I was past this central point, the map was pretty easy to handle. After all, I had Setsuna who could kill the enemy mages without having to worry about enemy bow users. Honestly, it was fun thinking through a conquest map again. Though part of the fun was also being able to go through it with Hoshiden units. With Valoria obtained, I then moved on to picking up Mitama. Since she's my final unit, I may as well use this map to properly talk about all my second generation units. Because of the picks I made, I got to use Sancho, Ignatius, Dwyer, Valoria, and Mitama. As I've already covered, Sancho is currently acting as one of my flyers and my only lock touch user. However, she's also my rally defense panic button in case I need a bit more safety in any situation. Otherwise, she's a pretty solid combat unit. Nothing super notable, but still rather helpful in various situations. Ignatius, on the other hand, is a painfully normal unit. With Oboro as his mother, his growths are pretty close to his base. He can work as a fine physical tank when he stays a general, but Benny's already filled that niche for my team. So I decided to have fun with him and see how he'd function as a Spearmaster with Wary Fighter. He probably ended up as one of my worst main units as a result, but he was still usable as either a blockade or a backpack when necessary. Dwyer, as stated before, was not a unit I had any plans to use. However, I made his mom Orochi in case I ever needed to use him. This was to make him a decent healer down the line, whether acting as a butler or a strategist. Valoria was to be one of the more useful children. Sadly, there were only 2 possible options for her mom, but Azura worked well for her. Mixing Azura's odd growths with Valoria's high bases turns Valoria into a much faster version of her father. She loses out on some bulk, but this is traded for speed, allowing her to be a quick, heavy hitter. She's immediately usable like this, but if I ever am worried about her, she can pick up decent skills from the fighter class line. Last of these children is Mitama, whose mother is Hinoka. This would provide me with 1 more Dragon Vein user, as well as a unit with very strong growths across the board. As such, Mitama is capable of filling various roles, whether that be as an extra bow user, a healer, or even a rally bot. Having inherited rally speed from Hinoka, she's able to assist my units with breaking speed ties. This versatility makes her an extremely useful unit in my army, as I can reactively use her for various situations. With all of my units obtained, it was time to focus solely upon beating the game now. Though if I'm being honest, the next few maps aren't all too interesting as my team is well balanced. With my defensive units like Benny, I can just lure the enemy into a desirable position for my heavy hitters to kill them. Chapter 21, while having my favorite gimmick, is extremely easy to get through. I suppose Chapter 22 can be difficult to start, but I find it pretty consistent if you shove your units in the corner at the start. Plus, Sancho made the map much easier as I could intercept the Falcon Knights that can make the start of the map such a pain. Otherwise, all that's necessary is killing Arete, who is quite weak against Valoria. Chapter 23 ended up being a map I could mostly ignore thanks to having 2 flyers. I still went through the map normally to give all my units the necessary experience, but there was never any danger. However, with the completion of this chapter, flyers no longer provide a unique benefit of ignoring map gimmicks. This meant it was finally time to put Sancho in her proper class of Paladin. She can now serve her form of justice. And what's a better time to do it than in the Metal Gear Emblem map? Instead of sneaking through, we pushed through and served justice. I didn't need the rewards for not getting caught, and I felt it would be a waste of time to sneak around. Though it ended up taking longer because I'm not used to alerting the guards. But the time it took was important, as it allowed me to consider what I would do with Sancho. She was my lock touch user, and I always sacrificed them to Mikoto on this map. After all, it's the easiest way to reach her, and my lock touch users aren't usually all that useful in combat. So losing them is a better cost than wasting a rescue. However, using Sancho so much has caused me to really appreciate my daughter. She's been a pretty good unit throughout this playthrough. And who is Don Quixote without Sancho? Upon her opening the way to Mikoto, I made the decision and had Azama rescue her. Our adventures together shall continue ever forward. The Sumeragi map is where things get much more involved again. The difficulty I suffered was in part from keeping my army separated into two teams for once, but it helped make the map go by faster and was possible thanks to my team's setup. However, I did stupidly set my physical fighters up against the enemy magic users, while my more balanced units handled the spearmasters and ninja. Thankfully, Benny has a pretty high resistance stat, so the map was still doable like this. It just took a while due to his low damage. Once the way out of the elevator was clear, it was easy to reach the final Dragon Vein and kill Sumeragi. The Gunter map that followed was easy as per usual. However, I did end up reclassing a couple units during this map as they'd reached level 15. Benny was changed to a Great Knight for higher movement, as his defenses are already quite good. And midway through the map, I reclassed Hinoka to the Spearmaster class, as I had no need for extra flyers or extra healing. It would allow her to continue acting as a strong attacker without suffering the weakness of being a flyer. With Gunter 100% dead forever, I began my preparations for the final battle against Anunkos. And it was during this time that I conceived an idea most ingenious. Thanks to the variety of skills I now had equipped on Sancho, as well as feeding her all the stat boosters I'd been holding on to, I wanted to see if she could complete Chapter 27 in one turn. As such, I cleared the general standing between her and Anunkos, and thanks to the boots I fed her, she had enough movement to reach him. By using a Brave Sword, she was able to delete more than half of the dragon's HP. By then sending Felicia and Dwyer forward to rescue Azura, she'll be close enough to sing for Sancho. From there, my daughter can kill Anunkos with another set of attacks. All that remains is Anunkos' full form. It's here where I actually use my team and have them hold off the enemy while Don Quixote and Sancho run around to handle each phase of Anunkos. Don Quixote thankfully did enough damage to each of the dragon's hands before Sancho moved to weaken the main body of Anunkos. To keep things quick and safe, Setsuna was able to come in and finish off the phase. By then pulling together the strength of all my units, I was capable of defeating Anunkos, ending my draft. Honestly, this was a really fun experience, and I think the major reason for that was how accessible I chose to make it for people of any skill level. There's just something interesting about seeing the choices people make when they've never even played Revelation. And then you throw someone like me in the mix, who hasn't really done many drafts, but has a very deep understanding of the game. The end result was 5 teams of really interesting picks. 3 of those teams ended up building their picks around some sort of gimmick. Ninja Emblem, Wyvern Elise and her entourage of interesting characters, or a bunch of magic with some guy who captures enemy units. Meanwhile, the other 2 teams went for more balanced unit picks. But even there they diverged. I focused more on mid-tier units, characters who are really good that get ignored due to there being better options. The other balanced team picked up strong units before settling for the more middling units and characters they like. Because of how fun this was, I hope to host more community drafts in the future. And just like with this one, they'll probably be hosted on my Discord, linked in the description. Anyways, thanks to y'all for being a cool community. And as I end the video, I'd like to show off some units that the draft players wanted to share.
serves you right.
Let's do this. We need it again. Good. You're right where I want you. Is that all? Die. That's it.
No more holding back!
This is the end. I did it! Your time has come! As expected. Fall so that others may live! We made it! Learned your lesson?
So weak. War is heck! All right! Wow, that worked. I'll do my best. Good job. I'm gonna tear you in half. You're nobody. I win.